to welcome everyone here today because this is going out beyond the confines of this room. Permit me, if you will, to say just a bit about the Wilson Center. I'm Bob Hathaway. I have the privilege and the honor of directing the Asia program here at the Wilson Center. We are one of the sponsors of today's program. The Wilson Center was created by an act of the U.S. Congress as the nation's official memorial to our 28th president, Woodrow Wilson, who was, as some of you may know, not only a president, but before that a college president, and before that a distinguished scholar and academic with a long career at Princeton University. The Wilson Center seeks to serve as a bridge between the world of the scholar and the world of the policymaker, or, in other words, to commemorate both the scholarly depth and the public policy concerns of President Wilson. We think that you will, at the conclusion of today's event, recognize that this is one of those events that seeks to straddle what is sometimes a gap between the world of the official and the world of the academic. We are fortunate to have as our partner today American University, and I will let you hear from two representatives of AU in just a moment. Let me first of all recognize on my left Amitav Acharya, who holds the UNESCO Chair in Transnational Challenges in Governance out of American, and he'll tell you a bit about his program. I will also be shortly introducing Dean Louis Goodman of American University, who will also say something about his program. Anyway, we're delighted to be working with them today to sponsor this. We're equally delighted to be working with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, your other host today. I'd like to particularly recognize Ms. Junko Chano in the front row here, who is the executive director of Sasakawa Peace Foundation, who has come all the way from Tokyo expressly for today's speech. We're delighted to have you back at the Wilson Center. Ms. Chano and Sasakawa Peace Foundation are long-term partners with the Asia program here at the Wilson Center. You didn't come to hear me, and so I'm going to vacate. Dean Louis Goodman invites you to come up for a moment.
Well, Bob, thanks very much, and it's a pleasure for me to be back here at the Wilson Center. I directed the Latin America program here in the 1980s, and it's wonderful to be learning about Asia, a part of the world where things move so much more quickly than they do in the part of the world that I've specialized in. And thank you for talking about American University, the School of International Service, where I'm dean, and Transcend, which is the center which focuses on transnational threats, which is directed by Amitav Acharya, my colleague, who holds the UNESCO chair at the School of International Service. For those of you, I think most people here know Dr. Acharya's work, focusing on international relations theory and on security in Southeast Asia. My favorite Amitav Acharya book is What Ideas Matter, which I think is a revolutionary book talking about why Asian ideas are going to matter more and more as the 21st century goes on. If you haven't read that book, I'd really encourage you to do so. I'd also encourage you to come to American University to participate in Transcend activities. It's a center that's comprised of 29 institutions around the world, coordinated by the School of International Service. Two-thirds of them are from South countries, and it really looks at the world from a Southern perspective, but engages the North in the way it looks at them, very consistent with Dr. Acharya's international relations perspectives. I'd also encourage you to visit our Asean Studies Center, the first Asean Studies Center in the United States, directed by our colleague Pekun Heng, who unfortunately is not able to be here. Our school is the largest school of international relations in the world. It has 3,500 students up there in Northwest Washington studying international relations. It was founded 52 years ago at the suggestion of Dwight Eisenhower, who urged us at the founding to wage peace through international service. And the individual who I'm introducing, Surin Pitsuwan, is an individual who really has waged peace through international service over the length of his career. So we feel it's very fitting that he's here speaking at an event, and his career epitomizes the ideals both of Dwight Eisenhower and of Woodrow Wilson, as Bob indicated earlier. You have Surin's official biography. Between the lines, it says that he has a deep knowledge and experience in the United States, starting as an American Field Service student in Minnesota, continuing with the BA at Claremont Men's College and an MA and PhD at Harvard, and an internship here in Washington, D.C. with Representative Geraldine Ferraro. He also has solid scholarly credentials established during his time on the faculty of Thammasat University in Bangkok. He has profound commitment to his home community in the southern Thai province of Nakhon Si Thammarat, which he represented for 8 terms in the Thai legislature, and where to this day he sponsors a community school for hundreds of students, a school that's directed by his mother. He has a remarkable record of cosmopolitan 21st century leadership, serving as the Thai Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1992 to 2001, and serving on many international commissions and advisory boards, and currently serving as Secretary General of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, known as Asean. But his unique international record, is truly unique. He played a key role rescuing Thailand from the 1997 economic crisis. And he served as a key advisor to the International Commission on State Sovereignty and Humanitarian Intervention, which developed the concept responsibility to protect, or Surin calls it R2P, adopted by the UN in 2005, and so very relevant today in events around the world. And his record includes leading ASEAN to become a unique, non-hegemonic, collaborative international grouping of nations dedicated to flexible, mutual, global engagement, and from my perspective, modeling 21st century cooperative international relations, the kind of international relations I hope could be established around the world. Surin, it's a pleasure to have you with us today, and Amitav is going to officiate over your talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much, Lou Goodman. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, particularly Bob Hathaway of the Woodrow Wilson Center, Ms. Chano, who has come all the way from Tokyo to be a part of this very important series being sponsored by the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Excellencies, ambassadors, I recognize many of you sitting there. This is a frightening audience indeed. And ladies and gentlemen, of all what Dean Goodman said about me, you can just shorten it by with one line, and that is, this guy is old. When I worked for Geraldine Ferraro for half a year and another half a year for the Republican Senate conference on the other side of the hill, I have made up my mind that I would not go into elective politics because life was so hectic. There was no time to be with your family. One day, a daughter called, "Can I have breakfast with my mom?" "No, it's taken." "Can I have dinner with my mom?" "No, it's taken." "Can I have lunch with my mom?" "No, it's taken. But you can come in between 2 lobbying groups." I thought I would never go into elective politics. I went back less than a year, parliament was dissolved, I was drafted into the Democrat Party at that time and served until I was drafted out to serve here at the Secretariat of Asean. It's been 3.5 years of extreme pressure and extreme pleasure to serve a community of 600 million people. I want to recognize also the program called Transnational Challenges and Emerging Nations Dialogue, Transcend, because it seeks to look at the world from a local perspective. And in my case, looking at the world from a regional perspective. ASEAN is a collection of 10 small and medium-sized nations. Total population of 600 million, not small. Combined GDP of about 2 trillion, larger than India, smaller than China, smaller than Japan, of course, but larger than India, third as a group in East Asia. Your number 4 market for export. The interesting part of it is Mr. Obama is going to join one of the ASEAN forums at the end of this year, called the East Asia Summit. And this has come after 2 full years of engagement or re-engagement between the United States and ASEAN. For a long while, you have focused, you have been diverted to other parts of the world where the situation required more of your resources, more of your attention, and more of your interest. But since the crisis, economic crisis of 2008, Mr. Obama himself has said that the gravity of the world has shifted toward East Asia. And for me personally, it occurred personally and immediately during the summit of ASEM, Asia-Europe meeting, in the Great Hall of the People of China in Beijing, the seat of the Communist Party. That was October 2008. When the European leaders appealed to Beijing, appealed to Mr. Wen Jiabao, the like of Barroso, Merkel, Sarkozy, and the rest of the European leaders who said, please, China, keep it open, keep buying, keep importing from our part of the world because we need the market and we need the consumption. So much so that David Miliband took me aside at that time, Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the UK, and said, Mr. Secretary General, this is a very strange meeting indeed, because we from the West came to the seat of the Communist Party of China and asked, appeal for help. So ASEAN has been part of that evolution of East Asia. In fact, ASEAN has been providing the centrality of a community building in East Asia. Why Mr. Obama has decided to join at the end of this year? Mrs. Clinton has been preparing the groundwork for this eventual participation of the US at that highest level of East Asia. It has been 10 plus 6 since 2005. Now it's going to be 10 plus 8 with the addition of Russia and the United States. What has ASEAN achieved in the past almost 4.5 decades? It began as a collection of rather centralized authoritarian states. Mr. Suharto stayed in power over 30 years. Mr. Mahathir stayed in power over 20 years. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, I couldn't remember how many years. Thailand too, the Philippines too. These countries began with essentially planned economies, essentially centralized states, essentially rather authoritarian. But we pursue political transformation along with economic prosperity. So while economic development has been achieved and it has become a legitimizing factor in the eyes of the people that these governments deliver, these leadership deliver. In the process, the space has been opened slowly but surely, step by step. The private sector themselves ask for participation, so you would hear from our part of the world the partnership between the government and the private sector, the public and the private sector. They formulate policies together. And then the media. They would fight, they would struggle for a space to express, to articulate, to communicate the desire, the aspiration of the people. Not all, but the space has been given to them. And then you have the civil society, then you have the academics. My point is this, just like Mr. Wilson said in front of the building, if the United States would like to show the people of the world how to travel on the paths toward democracy, toward liberty, and he used the word paths in plural. Paths. ASEAN. The collection of the ASEAN states have traveled on different paths toward a more opening, more democratic, not perfect, a lot more to be improved, but on the whole, it has done much better than countries in North Africa and in the Middle East and in the Gulf. So I think what we have done as a group of countries and have won respect, attention, and interest of the global leaders. Now we have 58 ambassadors to ASEAN working with me, working with us. Recognize. Now ASEAN is a permanent feature of the G20. Now ASEAN is recognized as regional institutions and organizations that could manage their own affairs. We have set up something not by ourselves alone, but by the +3 countries, China, Japan, and Korea, called the Chiang Mai Initiative Multilateralization. $120 billion as a safety net, a fund for these countries 13 who might need to draw upon quickly from this $120 billion in order to sustain their own macroeconomic imbalances, much like we faced back in 1997 when it began in Thailand, if you recall. That kind of initiative, that kind of innovation, that kind of regional architecture is something that the world is watching with great interest, that these countries have come this far after 40 years, 44 years of working together and are able to take care of some of the problems and relieve the global institutions on some of the issues. So I like to quote to you what Amartya Sen had to say about the journey of democracy and the prosperity in the economic field. He said, people in economic need also need a political voice. He said, democracy is not a luxury that can await the arrival of general prosperity. ASEAN has been doing a double journey, transforming, relaxing, promoting, and establishing a process of democracy. Some may have described us as illiberal democracy. But precisely because we have efficiency, continuity, and a certain level of security, we could attract foreign investment. We could pursue our national policies continuously. Some of you might say 30 years too long. Some of you might say 20 plus years in Malaysia is too long. Some of you might say 20 years in Singapore, 30 years in Singapore is too long. But such are the different paths toward freedom, toward liberty that Mr. Wilson talked about. So when things went rather ugly in North Africa and in the Middle East, there is this urge for people around the world, where would we look for a modality? And I would say countries in ASEAN have gone beyond what countries in North Africa, countries in the Gulf, in the Middle East are now going through. The difference is, in Southeast Asia, it has not been absolute control. The difference is we had to struggle, we had to experiment. Particularly the Muslim states, the people of the common faith of the people in North Africa and in the Middle East, in the Gulf. Because being in the periphery, having to live in the diversity, having to accommodate the differences, having to manage the challenges, living in the region that is so diversified, so different, in every which way that you can think of, culturally, religiously, linguistically, historically, economically, diverse. So the Muslims in Indonesia, Muslim in Malaysia, have to accommodate, forced to experiment. But in the heartland of Islam, forgive me for saying this, some of you might not like it, but in the heartland of Islam, everything is fossilized. You don't have to experiment. You don't have to innovate. You don't have to accommodate. Everything is provided. What do you need? Money is here. It's provided. I don't call that development. I call it modernity. But if you go to countries like Malaysia, you go to countries like Indonesia, you would see that people have to experiment. People have to struggle. People have to innovate. People have to manage the differences among themselves. And that is something that I think Southeast Asia and ASEAN can offer as a modality. Everything that is fundamental, everything that is sensitive, everything that is considered sacred can be discussed, can be debated, and can be exchanged in the public space. You can't do that in the Middle East. You can't do that in North Africa. the atmosphere and the stage and the forum is absolutely under control. And when it had to change because of these weapons of mass communication, because of this new technology, it burst, it exploded. We have gone through those stages, not as explosive, probably not as violent, and certainly not as destructive. So we are going through the double journey, what I call economic development. We have done quite well. Middle class is growing. Purchasing power is growing. Export is growing. Trade with the United States, about $200 billion a year. Investment of the US accumulatively in the region is highest than any other nation in the world. But new investment is coming in from Europe, the highest, from the EU. And interestingly enough for you, 60+% of all investment, foreign direct investment coming into ASEAN, going into the service sector. The service sector. What does it mean? It means people want to live more comfortably. It means people to live with their health being protected, with entertainment, with choices in life, improving the quality of life. It is becoming much more prosperous. Mr. Obama said to the 10 leaders of ASEAN last September in New York, the second summit, if we want to get out of our own crisis, if we want to solve our own economic problems that we have to sell more, we have to export more. We look around, where are the markets and where are the consumers? He said, you in Southeast Asia, you in ASEAN. So we have achieved a certain degree of economic prosperity, and we have achieved a certain degree of democratization. We have problems, we have challenges, and we have some of the controversies in the region. But the mechanisms of ASEAN are handling those issues. The issue of Myanmar. It has been an issue of tremendous anxiety of the international community and of all of us in ASEAN. When Cyclone Nargis came in 2008, even to open the country for external assistance was a big, big, big crisis for us to help open. We did help open it. And we opened a space for the civil society. And they have gone through their own journey. Is it enough? They have made an application that they want to be the chair of ASEAN in the year 2014. But the leaders of ASEAN said it's not automatic. The leader of ASEAN said we have to be convinced and confident that the journey to reconciliation and democratization inside Myanmar is comforting enough for the leaders to say yes, because ASEAN is not going to be meeting only among ASEAN leaders. This is what is good about connectivity and integration. We have to sit down with dialogue partners, the like of Mr. Obama, the like of Mr. Manmohan Singh, the like of Mr. Kang from Japan, the like of President Lee from Korea, the like of the European leaders. The EU is our partner too. So ASEAN is making a journey, step by step, bit by bit, but making sure that along the way we consolidate not only economic prosperity, but also our political stability and security through more and more democratic transformation. As I said, not perfect. But we have made a tremendous advance in our journey. And in many places, probably strong enough to expect that it will only go into the direction of more and more participation, more and more contribution, and more support of the people. That's why at the end of the year, there will be this huge summit in Bali. And that's why the attention of the world will be focused on Bali. And that's why in this country, your president is going to be there to recognize what ASEAN has achieved and to recognize what Mrs. Clinton called ASEAN, the fulcrum of the region's emerging architecture. Driven by ASEAN, chaired by ASEAN, initiated by ASEAN, but also open for participation from outside. We hope that this is going to be a stepping stone to a more integrated East Asia. It was Henry Kissinger, and I know he just wrote a new book, but I'm referring to one of his books back in the late 70s. He said, East Asia, as far as innovation, economic development, prosperity is concerned, science and technology is concerned, is 20th century Europe. But he said, as far as institutions and systems and processes to manage the problems and the challenges that could occur geopolitically, strategically, he said East Asia is 19th century Europe. There's no institution, there's no process, there is no system that could manage the differences such as they have in Western Europe. For the last 4 decades, ASEAN has been doing just that. For the last 4 decades, ASEAN has been providing that centrality, evolving of a small C community in East Asia. We are building our own big C community. By the year 2015, we hope to build the ASEAN community, one market. And we are already thinking into the future, what would be beyond 2015. But East Asia as a whole is evolving into its own small C community with the gravity that has been gravitated to East Asia, with the prosperity that has been recognized, and with the expectation that East Asia would be a new locomotive that would pull the global economy forward or out of its own crisis. So I'm giving you the background. Some of you might not realize why Mrs. Obama is joining these countries of very, very small, and a collection of small and medium-sized states. It is critical, sitting in the middle of the 2 major growing markets. It is strategically important, and it is transforming very quickly, and it is a major partner of the United States of America. And we welcome the re-engagement of the United States in Southeast Asia. It is opening up tremendous opportunities. It is going to lead to many strategic new initiatives in the region. It is maybe going to create some tension, but also some room and some opportunity for cooperation in the region. Mr. Gates at the ASEAN Plus 8 defense ministers meeting in Hanoi last October, in front of the defense minister from Russia, from India, from China, from Japan, from South Korea, from Australia, from New Zealand, and 10 from ASEAN, Mr. Gates had this to say. He said, "We are a Pacific power." And he said, "We are a resident. We are a Pacific nation, and we are a resident power." In other words, militarily, the U.S. has been there, but probably not obvious, probably not as present as before, but it has been there in the background. Now, more engagement, signing the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, and engaging at the various meetings of ASEAN, ARF, post-ministerial meeting, and now EAS. The U.S. is indeed coming back in full form. And that is welcome by all of us. I will submit that not because of the attractiveness of East Asia and of ASEAN as a market, as a trading partner, but also as a group of countries that have achieved certain level on the road to democratization themselves. And we could be a model. We could be a modality. We could be an example for some countries struggling to cope with how to deal, how to manage, and how to work in order to save the tradition at the same time to accommodate modernity. Countries in North Africa and country in the Middle East. Let me stop by leaving you with this line of thought, rather provocative. And I would say the road to reconciliation between the West and the Muslim world might very well run through Southeast Asia, might very well run through some member states of ASEAN who have struggled and achieved on their own with different paths to liberty, as Wilson said it, put it. And I think this is what Transcend is all about. This is what the Wilson Center is all about. This is what the Sasagawa Peace Foundation is all about. And that is to open forum and opportunities for us to share different perspectives toward a common goal and a common vision. And that common goal and common vision is both liberty, freedom, democracy, and economic prosperity. We have our own little green book called the Charter. And this has been in existence since 2008. And in this, there's lofty language about principles of democracy, about human rights, about inclusivity, about people-centered, about the rule of law, about trying to resolve disputes by peaceful means, setting up mechanisms of dispute settlement. I was asked by none other than Madame Hillary Clinton, how much would ASEAN implement this lofty document? I guess she knew that in the past ASEAN signed, go back home and forget about what we agreed upon. I told her my own understanding of your own history. I said, we have to make it a living document. Much like your Declaration of Independence. When Thomas Jefferson penned that very lofty sentence that we hold these truths to be true, self-evident, among them that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote it, he did not include all men. He did not include women. He did not include men without property. But every successive generation of the American people appealed to that document. I am dreaming of a day when the ASEAN citizens raised their hand and said, Mr. Leader, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. President, where are my rights according to that charter that you have penned your name and your signature on it in our name? It began with the phrase, it begins with the phrase, we the people of ASEAN. So the journey is still long. The road is still very much rugged, much like your own struggle and your own journey. Abraham Lincoln appealed to that piece of literature. Martin Luther King did. Barack Obama did. In our part of the world, this is going to be that living document that every child, every parent will appeal to and creates a space for himself and herself. And our record has not been too bad. Economic prosperity and democratization have come side by side. Much more to do, much more to go, but it's better than many other parts of the world. If ASEAN can achieve what it has set out to achieve, realize its own dream and vision, the world will have one less region to worry about. We can take care of ourselves, but of course, with your help, with your support, with your goodwill, and we appreciate very, very much the support and the goodwill that you have given to us. And the presence of the President on the 17th, 18th, 19th of November after the APEC meeting in Honolulu will be an affirmation of that goodwill from the American people to the 600 million of ASEAN people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Surin Pitsuwan. And it's my job now to open the session to comments and questions from the floor. But before I do that, let me make one simple observation about the event of today and the institution that I am leading at the American University called Transcend. Dr. Surin started by saying that he's going to give us a regional perspective on global issues. By the way, I want to clarify that when I say local, I also mean regional, so local perspective. In fact, this has been a kind of an issue for me personally, but also for many academics intellectually. We have a global power shift going on. A lot of that power shift has to do with the so-called emerging powers, including China, of course, India, maybe even Asean is an emerging power, Brazil, South Africa. But when we go to debates and discussions on emerging powers, and I've been to so many of them in the last few years, I lost count of them, it's all about how or what the emerging powers think of themselves and their role. Or it's about how the established powers think of the emerging powers. But it's very seldom how the rest of the world looks at the emerging powers. How does, say, Bangladesh feel about India? How does maybe Laos feels about Indonesia? My position has been that before emerging powers can become truly global powers, they need to have legitimacy from within their neighborhood. And this is the reason why we at American University School of International Service, with help of Dean Goodman, but with also recognition from UNESCO, set up this UNESCO chair and the program called Transcend. And what you have given us today, giving us a perspective on democracy, democratization, your idea of multiple paths, your idea of double journeys. Now, the way I look at it, these are not just issues that are relevant for ASEAN. I think these are pathways, these are alternative ways of looking at democratization as a phenomenon worldwide. Now, we know that the Middle East is going through a journey of democratization. It may not lead to something very substantial. It's too early. But my question to you at this point is that do you see the ASEAN's pathway is actually a global model? Is it something more relevant, more usable than, say, the agenda of regime change that we see that's going on, whether you're talking about Libya or other parts of the world? So I would like to open the discussion today, because this will be consistent with the mission of Transcend, to give us a local perspective on global order and construction of global order. So my question is, since you are also an advisor to the R2P Commission, probably you can tell us a little bit about the key issue of the day today. How do we promote democratic governance? How do we promote political change, not regime change, political change in the developing world? And then the floor is yours to ask questions and comments, and I know that we are running short of time.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Amitav. Well, our journey certainly has been less costly than the imposition of new regimes, of change of regime, and you don't know where you're going to end up with that kind of imposition. We have to be extremely patient. We have to face a lot of criticism, a lot of pressure, and a lot of ridicule sometimes, but we have been persistent. The regional environment to help each other to move forward on the road to liberty, to use the Wilsonian phrase, certainly is less costly. And when you impose, you don't know whether you're going to get, in some experiences around the world, you don't get what you wanted. It's better for people to experiment, be patient when they fall, when they fail, but help them up when they need to get up and walk again. That has been, I would say, a general experience of Southeast Asia. Indonesia now is pretty much, I think, in the Freedom House, Indonesia is in Southeast Asia is the only country that is free. Can you believe that? 10 years ago, Thailand was pretty free under me, but now it's not considered as free. So there is this what you call yo-yo, this roller coaster process or road on the whole, it is going up slowly. And if you compare, our experiment with, as I said, with the Middle East or with Africa, I think both economically and politically, it is acceptable. It's not a failure, but less costly. So you experiment, you encourage exchange, and you support. And I'll give you an example. There is now, according to the Charter, the Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. Now, the commissioners are appointed by 10 countries, 10 governments. You can imagine how much human rights they're going to talk about, and who are prepared to talk about, who are not prepared to talk about. But the fact that there is that Intergovernmental Commission sitting, meeting, my advice to a lot of civil society from around the world interested, or governments interested in promoting democracy and human rights in ASEAN, I say support the civil society in the ASEAN, on the ASEAN landscape. Because these people are going to collect information, follow cases, and analyze the situation and the cases, and they are going to present to this commission. What do you have to say about these obvious cases that we have documented? There is going to be this dialectical relationship. In the end, when the landscape is ready, when the landscape is sophisticated, when the landscape is full of information, you force the institutions to react and to behave in a way that you want it to behave. So once committed, once established, you have something to rally around. And that's, I'm glad to tell you, there are a lot of NGOs around the world. Frederick Ebert Stiftung, Sasakawa Foundation, Nippon Foundation, the Asia Foundation. There are Swiss government, Norwegian government, Swedish government. They are doing just that, helping the civil society with focus on those issues to grow, to be strengthened, and to be effective, and work with the official institutions that have been established, probably half-heartedly, probably because of the demand and expectation and the pressure from around the world. ASEAN is the only region that has not had what they call regional mechanism. And the Commissioner of Human Rights in Geneva has complained to me many, many times, many of them. Now we have it, not perfect, but let's make it a mirror image, that the landscape, that the civil society in all these countries are being strengthened, and they will deliver their demand, their pressure, and their information, and the institution or this human rights mechanism will have to react. And that will take time, will take patience, and that will take understanding and support. And many of them have decided to support. So this is the way we have to work together. Longer time, but certainly less costly.
Thank you very much. I know that we are running very short of time, but with the permission of our the real host, Bob Hathaway, if I can take 10 minutes, unless Bob stands up and says, shut up, and we have to go. But the reward for you, by the way, after this, that you will have a cocktail reception waiting for you. I know if I take 15 minutes of your time, there'll be 2 drinks less than what you might do, but I'm sure we can make up for that. So I'll take 10, 15 minutes to take a few questions. And yes, please, madam. If you could briefly introduce yourself.
From Myanmar.
Yes, once upon a time.
Yes.
I'm Priscilla Clapp. I'm a retired diplomat, and I served in Myanmar once. I have 2 quick questions. One, has the ASEAN way been overtaken by the ASEAN Charter? and I think you probably know what I mean. And number two, has ASEAN along the way in its development been either directly or indirectly developing a capacity to manage security and stability in the region?
Thank you. Has the charter taken over the ASEAN way? ASEAN way meaning going easy, and no interference. In the spirit of this new document, it has. I can give you the example of Thailand and Cambodia. Is the Thai ambassador here?
No.
That's all right. I'll be responsible for what I say. It's the first time that the chair of ASEAN could travel to the two capitals. Never in our history. You never ask a question of what's happening inside, let alone in between. Between the two member states. This time, they discuss openly. It came to the UN, and the chair of ASEAN was invited to the UN. First time in history. On top of that, the chair almost knew that inevitably it will be thrown back to ASEAN because of this document. The UN Security Council met on the 14th of February. The invitation to all ASEAN foreign ministers to come to Jakarta to talk about the issue between Thailand and Cambodia. Two kingdoms, Buddhists, having difficulty over a Hindu ruin. and a Muslim is supposed to be mediating. That's all right, that's my job. And I did behind the scene. But the UN Security Council met on the 14th. The letter inviting all the foreign ministers to meet in Jakarta was issued on the 11th. What does that mean? It means the chair recognized that the power and the responsibility rests on ASEAN. ASEAN, again, is the only regional organization, or in the language of the UN Charter, regional arrangements. If you read the Charter, I think Article 25, 26 there, OSCE, the EU, NATO, Organization of American States, even the African Union have been called upon by the UN to help settle the problems in your own region. ASEAN has never been recognized as mature enough to do that. This time, it has been asked to deliver. And the ASEAN foreign ministers were called together to do nothing but to talk about the issue between the two member states. I would say, yes, the Charter has somehow empowered, encouraged, and give confidence to the chair. Now, you will ask me, will the chair be the same every chair every year? Probably not. It just so happened that this year it's Indonesia, with its weight, with its legitimacy, with its profile, with its experiences. It could. But what I'm saying is the Charter has given the chair and the organization the responsibility and the prescribed role. And that is a change. And it's not going to be, again, linear development. In the next few years, it might not be the same until one chair would come up and said, I am taking the Charter more seriously than the previous ones, and I will use it to the full. So, yes, but I'm not sure if it's really that big of a leap yet, but it is certainly an instrument that has empowered the chair and the organization and somewhat the Secretary General. Your second question is, one word?
Well, it's sort of similar to what you were just saying. Is ASEAN developing the capacity to manage security and stability?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Indonesia has come up with a TOR to establish the Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. And that, in your experience of ASEAN, is a taboo. You don't mediate. You don't get into issues and problems because of the principle of non-interference. But what I have related to you, we have become much more understanding of each other, recognizing the fact that your problem could be my problem. If you recall my initiative of flexible engagement 10, 15 years ago, and that is, we are not going to be absolute about non-interference. There are issues that would affect me as a neighbor, affect the region as a neighbor. Let us talk about it openly, candidly. It was rejected in full, total, in 1998. Stanley Roth here is very much informed of that. But now it has gone beyond my dream. They could talk, they could discuss, they could ask questions, they could advise, they could issue statement expressing concern and expecting that the situation will be managed, will be solved peacefully, quickly. That 15, 12 years ago is a no-no. Ambassador Hecklinger must understand, must realize that sensitivity way back. So, yes, and we are following through various articles here, and some of them are very, very far-reaching, but it'll take time. I won't finish it in 5 years of mine. Somebody else will have to take over and try to move it forward. Yes?
Stanley Roth actually is the next person wanting to ask
Mr.
a
Roth,
question.
please.
Yeah.
Stanley Roth, Boeing. I have both a quick comment and a question. The comment is about regime change. And it strikes me that perhaps it's not a great idea to compare ASEAN and regime change with what's happening in the Middle East, because I see more similarities than differences. And what I mean by that is you have every model within ASEAN of regime change, from success, people's power in the Philippines, what happened in Indonesia, spectacular failure, Myanmar, and work in progress, Thailand. So you've had things from violence to mass violence and repression to success. And that's not so different from Tunisia, Egypt, and what we're seeing now going on elsewhere in the region. So I wouldn't draw too much from it. My question is a follow-on really to Priscilla's and has to do with regional governance. I see the topic today is global governments, but your comments have focused a lot more on the region. And I guess the question is, doesn't it make sense to focus on some of the institutional aspects of regional governance in areas where you have the best chance of success, which has been sort of an implicit ASEAN strategy all along for 3-4 decades? So, for example, in areas like humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and dealing with some of the functional issues like climate change, as opposed to jumping in, feet first in the areas like mediation of conflicts, where there's a lot at risk here. I give Indonesia a lot of credit for what it's trying, but there's a risk of failure and what that might mean if it doesn't work. So what about the functional areas where ASEAN has a better chance of success?
Well, thank you for asking that question. We have certainly done quite a bit on the functional cooperation. Certainly Cyclone Nargis is a case in point. And because of Cyclone Nargis, I was given another hat, Chief Humanitarian Coordinator. So from now on, the Secretary of ASEAN will have to have that responsibility. And disaster relief is a big issue. Every time we meet and the leaders meet, it's one of the issues. In fact, Mr. Obama is going to go into the meeting with that one of the indicative list, or on the indicative list. Climate, we try to have common stands, and there has always been a consultation, a meeting before Climate change for us is very immediate and very concrete because our people, 80% of our people live less than 100 kilometers from the coast. Anything happen, any catastrophe, any rise of the sea level will inundate many of the urban areas in ASEAN. So those are the areas that we work together. Forest fire in Kalimantan, in Sumatra, that certainly have impact upon Singapore, Malaysia, and southern Thailand. They have worked on those, what they call functional issues. Pandemic, the fact that we could stop the spread of avian flu on the track, and it has not reoccurred, it's because somebody is doing something. The public might take it for granted that the thing just disappeared by itself, but very alert, very vigilant, and very, very closely coordinated in all countries of Southeast Asia with the larger countries of the region, and with WHO, and with your own Centers for Disease Control. So these are the functional cooperation that we have managed as a group and have done quite well. You would be so kind to allow us to try something that is a bit ambitious. The charter calls for it, that there shall be permanent mechanisms of dispute settlement in all areas, economic, political, or even fighting about who owns the copyright of the dancing posture. So in all areas thou shall establish mechanisms of dispute settlement. We are doing that. We are in the process of doing that. Indonesia, again, is taking the lead because of its experiences. At any moment, we have at least 5,000 peacekeepers around the world, hotspots anywhere. Well, we're now thinking, can we coordinate on that? Can we work under an ASEAN flag rather than individual? These are the things that may be symbolic, but it points into the direction that we want to create a community. And many people ask me, when are you going to have one currency? Are you going to be like the EU? And my answer to those questions is the EU is an inspiration, not a model for ASEAN. Not yet. Because of the diversity that we have to manage that diversity, not only among us, but in the entire region. So we are creating institutions and systems and platforms and processes in order to make sure that we have something to work with if we have crises and challenges, as Kissinger observed. But it is extremely difficult to create institutions from the diversity that we have. We began differently from Europe. Europe began with major countries with very concrete objectives, coal and steel, and then bring the smaller countries to join. ASEAN began with the reverse modality. Smaller, very weak group of nations, but hook on the big ones. China, Japan, Korea, Australia, India, US, Canada, the EU, Russia. Through dialogue, partnerships, we bring them all in to work with us and to support us. We have been providing the centrality. I don't know how long we can keep that, but unless and until we can consolidate, integrate effectively, really one market, really high purchasing power, big middle class, it's difficult to hold on to this centrality. We know that, we realize that, we are working on it.
Right, I'll take just one more question, and I know you can continue this conversation at the reception that will follow, since the Secretary General will be actually there. So, over there. Yeah.
Ambassador.
I was trying to figure out how to get a question on Thailand into this discussion of ASEAN. So a number
I think
of
you
us.
better not try.
Well, when you were foreign minister, you and Thailand played a very important and leading role in ASEAN, as well in other aspects of relationships in Asia among nations. And certainly the Thai political system allowed Thailand to weather the financial crisis much more effectively than in certain other countries. The question I have for you now is, how has Thailand's troubles affected its role in the region and its role with ASEAN? And if you do have any insights you can share with us as to what's likely to be the course with the elections this summer and the
That's a
implications.
very long question. You have a couple of minutes to.
Ambassador, unfortunately, it has affected Thailand's leading role in the region. And not only that, even domestic issues could not be resolved because, unfortunately, the government in Bangkok has spent most of the time trying to survive. So there is no stability. There's not enough of the confidence and margin of power in the parliament to really affect any real change or new initiatives. So the situation in the south has not been resolved, in spite of the fact that the Democrats come from the south and claim that it understands the issue more than anybody else. It has not had an opportunity to put all the efforts and all the resources, intellectual or otherwise, to try to solve the problem. So internally, regionally, and internationally, I think it has affected the role and the efficacy of Thai diplomacy, Thai leadership, unless and until the country is healed. It's going to be difficult. And how is this new elections going to play out? I still believe that the coalition will come back, not because the Democrat is the centerpiece of that coalition, but I think the country, the people are getting tired of divisiveness, and I think toward the end, aside from the issue of economy and inflation, I think the coalition has done quite well managing the internal problems, and I expect them to come back and to manage the wound, to manage the divide in the middle. It's not going to be easy, but I think the only way forward is to let the people have a say, have their say. And they have done a polling recently. Which side are you on, yellow or red? 80% in the middle said neither one. We want peace, we want reconciliation, we want continuity into the future. We want the future for the children. So that, I think, is where the hope is, that people will want stability, people will want a healing process to go on. Now, of course, we have other challenges that I don't want to mention here. We have issues, that are structural, that need to be resolved. But again, I would say, don't look at Thailand as lacking democracy. It's too much of it, to the point where it's very difficult to put it in the frame, in the process. And institutions need to be transformed, needs to be strengthened in some cases, and needs to adjust to face modern challenges. Again, the question for the people is how to face modernity, how to face globalization, how to be able to compete. And they have been very much traumatized in the last few years that they could not quite compete. And I think the new thinking is, let's get our acts together and move forward again. and there's still hope. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm afraid I will have to bring to a close the phase 1 of today's event, but you certainly would be able to continue your questions and conversations with Dr. Surin at the reception that will follow at the Wilson Dining Hall immediately after this event. But before I close this phase, let me just acknowledge a few people who have been really critical in making this event successful. I'd like to acknowledge, of course, first and foremost, Bob Hathaway and his colleague, Sue Levenstein, who have done a wonderful job of making this event possible. We are American University. We are not, we are off Washington, but we are a little further away from the core of Washington think tank community. So without their help, we could not have hosted this event. I would like to thank very much the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA and its resident representative, Keiji Iwatake, for providing advice, support, and of course, funding, very important for making this event successful. And I know his colleagues, including Mrs. Chano from Tokyo, we are deeply appreciative of your support. And last but not the least, I would like to thank my colleagues from American University, Dean Louis Goodman, one of the best people I ever had the privilege to work with, for actually supporting all our adventures. The Asean Study Center, it was really, without his support, we could not have done this. Now, of course, Transcend, and this is really a remarkable vision and leadership that he has provided to the School of International Service that makes all these things possible. I would also like to thank my two students, Erika Seng and Shansan Wong, for helping me to make this event possible and playing a very important role in various stages of its organization. Once again, thank you very much. Thanks all of you for coming. But before we go, let me invite you to join me in thanking our speaker today for his excellent presentation.